We're going to bring in Hugh Hewitt now, who has a question for Governor Pataki.
Thank you, Jake. Governor, you signed the pledge to support the Republican nominee, and you promptly broke it. By doing so, by tweeting out that you would not support Donald Trump, have you released Donald Trump to be a free agent again, or anyone else in the field?
No, Hugh, not at all. I have not broken the pledge because Donald Trump is not going to be the Republican nominee, period. Flat out, I guarantee you that.
Governor,
will vote for the Republican nominee.
You said on Twitter that you would not support Donald Trump. If he's the nominee, will you support him?
He's not going to be the nominee, Hugh. And let me just say one word here. This is an important election with an enormous number of challenges facing the American people. And the first four questions are about Donald Trump.
And the fifth one is, too. Would you really vote for Hillary Clinton
I would not vote for
over Donald Trump if he's the nominee?
No, I will vote for the Republican nominee. But let me say this flat out. Donald Trump is unfit to be president of the United States or the Republican Party's nominee. Look at what he did in Atlantic City. He says he's going to make America great again. He invested 4 casinos in Atlantic City, and he said, essentially, I'm going to make Atlantic City great again. Every one of those casinos went bankrupt. Over 5,000 Americans lost their job. And you know people who, in this difficult economic time, have lost their job and the pain that causes. He didn't lose anything. 5,000 lost their jobs. He will do for America what he did for Atlantic City, and that is not someone we will nominate.
Governor Jindal, Senator Graham just said it's all about winning. And in fact, if former Secretary of State Clinton is the successor to President Obama, none of this matters and all this conversation is beside the point. In the Washington elite, they have a habit of saying nice things about each other until election time. Senator Graham has praised Secretary of State Clinton as a great choice to be the Secretary of State, as a national treasure. Can anyone from inside of Washington win this election cycle, having praised Secretary of State Clinton that way?
No, and it's not only whether they can win, they shouldn't win this election cycle. One of the things I do agree, and I want to thank Donald Trump after I've criticized him for everything from being a narcissist to an egomaniac, one of the things he was right about was to say nonsense to the D.C. establishment. It is time to fire all of them. You've got a choice between honest socialists on the left, like Bernie Sanders, and lying conservatives on the right. We've got the majority. What good has it done us? See, they said they were going to stop amnesty. They said they were going to repeal Obamacare. They didn't do either. Now they're not even willing to fight to defund Planned Parenthood. McConnell has already waved the white flag of defeat. They're not willing to stand up to fight for the issues that count. I think it is time to have term limits. I think it's time to have part-time citizen legislators. Let's pay them a per diem instead of a 6-figure salary. Stop them from being 7-figure lobbyists. Let's also pay them a per diem for every day they don't go to D.C. Let's keep them out of D.C. Working in the real. Let's make them live under the same rules and laws they apply to the rest of us. Not only shouldn't they be elected, they can't be elected. Let's fire all of them from their current positions.
Senator Graham, I took a shot at you. You're having a good debate, but there is this problem of Washington elites and saying wonderful things about each other.
I've been called a lot of things, but never elite before. My dad owned a liquor store, a bar, and a pool room. So only in America can you go from the back of the liquor store to being an elite.
Is that responsive to calling Hillary Clinton a national treasure, Senator?
I introduced her at a conference about Africa. I thought Secretary Clinton did a good job when it came to dealing with our problems in Africa, particularly among women. George W. Bush set $40 billion aside, and Rick Santorum helped him. And President Bush wiped out AIDS and malaria for an entire generation of young African children. Secretary Clinton did a good job. Here's my problem, Secretary Clinton. Where the hell were you on the night of the Benghazi attack? How did you let it become a death trap to begin with? And why did you lie about what happened to these people? And if you want a new change in terms of foreign policy, don't pick her because she's his Secretary of State. I've got a real good chance of beating her because I don't say things bad about her all the time, just when she deserves it. And her definition of flat broken mind are a little bit different.
But, Senator, can you go back and forth that way and expect to have an argument with the American people to persuade them about that?
Ronald Reagan did a couple of really big things that we should all remember. He sat down with Tip O'Neill, the most liberal guy in the entire House. They started drinking together. That's the first thing I'm going to do as president. We're going to drink more. And what did these two great Irishmen do? They found a way to save Social Security from bankruptcy by adjusting the age of retirement from 65 to 67. So, yes, I will say nice things at times about Democrats. Yes, I will work them work with them. I will put the country ahead of party. Absolutely, I want to work with them. At the end of the day, Hugh, I'm lucky to be standing here. I'm the first in my family to ever go to college. Neither one of my parents finished high school. Darlene's here with me tonight. We owned a restaurant. But wait a minute. I understand. You asked me a question. This is important. Republicans need to tell the American people we get it as to who you are. When my mom died, I was 21. When my dad died when I was 22, we were wiped out financially. If it weren't for a Social Security survivor benefit check coming into Darlene, we wouldn't have made it. I don't need a lecture from Democrats about Social Security. I want to save it.
Hugh, I'm going to go to Hugh Hewitt for a question for Governor Pataki.
There are other ways, Governor, than bombing Iran. I want to quote Rick Santorum. We should send a very clear message that if you are a scientist and you're going to work on a nuclear program to develop a bomb for Iran, you are not safe. Does that message work? Does anything that works on the table?
Not on the table, but I think there's a lot that does work. And that is to have a strong America, a strong military, and a resolve where the Iranians know that not only are we going to reject this deal on day one and reimpose sanctions, but if they move forward with the nuclear program, their safety for those facilities will be at risk. I'll tell you a couple of things I do. I give the Israelis bombs called MOPs, massive ordnance penetrators. Give them to Israel. Let the Iranians know we're prepared to work with Israel to make sure they never have a nuclear weapon. And let me point out that Hillary Clinton is supporting this deal. She was the senator from New York on September 11th. She saw what happened at the hands of radical Islam. This is the senator who did the reset program with Russia, who allowed the Middle East to deteriorate to flames, who has lied about Benghazi and is now supporting the Iranian deal. That's the opponent we are going to have next November. We have got to win this election. Everything we say is wonderful, but we have to win. And once we win, we have to actually do what we say. I can do this.
Senator Santorum, staying on that. Any means necessary? Is that what you meant to say? Is that what's still on the table after this, what many of us believe is a catastrophic deal?
As you know, Hugh, 12 years ago, I authored the Iran Freedom Support Act, which put sanctions on the Iranian nuclear program as we came within 4 votes of passing a very strong version of that. The 4 people who opposed me on the floor, Joe Biden, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama. And we came 4 votes short, but for 12 years, I have been laser beam focused on the issue of Iran with a nuclear weapon. Why? Because I understand who they are. Yes, they're radical Islamists, that's true. But they're a particular version of it, which is an apocalyptic version, which is a death cult. They believe in bringing about the end of the world. If you poll Iranians and Iraqis, Shiites in the region, more than 2/3 of them believe that the end of the world is going to come within their lifetime. Why? Because their regime preaches it. They believe in bringing about the end of times. That's their theological goal. And we are in the process of giving them a nuclear weapon to do just that. That's why on day one, I would say to the Iranian government, you open up all of these facilities for inspection. You make them available to the UN, to the US, everything. We can go everywhere, or else we will take out those facilities. And when people say you're going to start a war, my response is, no, I'm going to stop a war, because a nuclear Iran is the end.
I'm Jake Tapper. We're live at the Ronald Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California for the main event. Round 2 of CNN's presidential debate starts now. We're going to turn now to Hugh Hewitt from Salem Radio Network.
Thank you, Jake. Mr. Trump. Yes. 2 years ago, President Obama drew a red line that the Syrian dictator Bashar Assad crossed. President Obama threatened to strike. He did not. His knees buckled. We now have 4 million refugees. Syria is a living hell. And he turned to the Congress for the authority to back him up. You have 3 senators to your right who said no. Do they bear responsibility for this refugee crisis? And what would you have done when Bashar Assad crossed that line?
Number one, I wouldn't have drawn the line, but once he drew it, he had no choice but to go across. They do bear some responsibility, but I think he probably didn't do it not for that reason. Somehow he just doesn't have courage. There's something missing from our president. Had he crossed the line and really gone in with force and done something to Assad. If he had gone in you with tremendous force, you wouldn't have millions of people displaced all over the world.
How much responsibility, Mr. Trump, did the senators hold?
I think they had a responsibility, absolutely. I think we have three of them here.
Senator Rubio?
I think they had a responsibility, yes.
Let me tell you, there were times where we have zero responsibility, because let's remember what the president said. He said the attack that he was going to conduct was going to be a pinprick. Well, the United States military was not built to conduct pinprick attacks. If the United States military is going to be engaged by a commander-in-chief, it should only be engaged in an endeavor to win. And we're not going to authorize use of force if you're not putting men and women in a position where they can win. And quite frankly, people don't trust this president as commander-in-chief because of that.
Senator Paul.
I think this gets to the point of wisdom on when we should intervene and when we shouldn't. Had we bombed Assad at the time, like President Obama wanted, like Hillary Clinton wanted, and like many Republicans wanted, I think ISIS would be in Damascus today. I think ISIS would be in charge of Syria had we bombed Assad. Sometimes both sides of a civil war are evil, and sometimes intervention makes us less safe. This is the real debate we have to have in the Middle East. Every time we've toppled a secular dictator, we've gotten chaos, the rise of radical Islam, and we're more at risk. So I think we need to think before we act and know that most interventions, if not a lot of them in the Middle East, have actually backfired on us.
Thank you, Senator Paul. I want to turn now to my colleague, Dana Bash.
Hold on a second. Jake, he asked me as well. I'd like to actually
Go
get
ahead,
a chance
sir. That would be fair.
to respond to that.
You're right. You're the third senator.
I think I'm the first senator. The number one test for use of military force should be the vital national security interest of the United States. The reason why I opposed President Obama bombing Syria is because he couldn't answer the question, what do you do if chemical weapons end up in the hands of radical Islamic terrorists like al-Nusra, like al-Qaeda, like ISIS? Now, I also want to respond to several of the folks up here who said, we should trust this Iranian deal and see if the Iranians will comply. Anyone who's paying attention to what Khamenei says knows that they will not comply. There's a reason Khamenei refers to Israel as the little Satan, and America is the great Satan. In the middle of negotiating this treaty, Khamenei led the assembled masses in chanting death to America. I'm reminded of a great editorial cartoon. It shows the Ayatollah Khamenei saying death to all Americans. And then it shows John Kerry coming back saying, can we meet you halfway? We need a commander-in-chief who will stand up and protect this country. And I'll tell you, I can't wait to stand on that debate stage with Hillary Clinton and to make abundantly clear, if you vote for Hillary, you are voting for the Ayatollah Khamenei to possess a nuclear weapon, and if you elect me as president, under no circumstances will a theocratic Ayatollah who chants death to America ever be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon.
Thank you, Senator.
I'd like to talk about winning, because I think all of you are more qualified than former Secretary of State Clinton, and as were the people in the first debate. But there are different styles. And Carly Fiorina, Governor Kasich, you are conveniently located next to each other, and you have different styles. Governor Kasich, you've been on my show a lot. You refuse to attack Hillary Clinton. You just don't want to go there. You want to do the Up With People, Go Ohio campaign, and I like that. Carly Fiorina, I don't have to bring up the Secretary of State. You bring her up sua sponte. Which one of you is wrong? Governor Kasich?
Well, look, people still have to get to know me, so I want to spend my time talking about my experience, reforming welfare, balancing budgets, cutting taxes, providing economic growth when I was in Washington, turning Ohio around, $8 billion in the hole, $2 billion surplus, up over 300,000 jobs, big tax cuts, strengthening our credit. All those things matter. But, you know, I as a young man, in my first election in 1978, I defeated an incumbent Democrat. I defeated an incumbent Democrat in 1982, running on the Reagan program. I was the only Republican in America to defeat an incumbent Democrat that year. And then when I won for election to governor, I was the first Republican to defeat an incumbent in 36 years, and the first person to have never run statewide, out of politics for 10 years, to beat an incumbent. That hadn't happened for 96 years. So we'll get to the point where we'll talk about Hillary Clinton or whoever the nominee is record. But right now, I want to give people a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, a sense of unity, a sense that we can do it. So, you know, at the end of the day, I'm going to continue to talk about my record because do you ever notice when people run for office, they run for president, they make a lot of promises, they don't keep them. I don't intend to do that, and I'm going to be out there pushing and all. Don't worry about me and Hillary. That'll all work out, and I'm from Ohio. She will not beat me there. I can promise you that.
Carly Fiorina, your style.
You see, Governor Christie, people spend a lot of time talking about their track records, and Mr. Trump and I have every right to do the same. And Mrs. Clinton is going to have to defend her track record of lying about Benghazi, of lying about her emails, about lying about her servers. She does not have a track record of accomplishment. Like Mrs. Clinton, I too have traveled hundreds of thousands of miles around the globe. But unlike Mrs. Clinton, I know that flying is an activity. It is not an accomplishment. Mrs. Clinton, if you want to stump a Democrat, ask them to name an accomplishment of Mrs. Clinton's.
Thank you, Ms. Fiorina. Governor Christie, your name was mentioned. I want to give you a chance to respond.
Listen, Hugh, it's an important point. And the question is, who's going to prosecute Hillary Clinton? The Obama White House seems to have no interest. The Justice Department seems to have no interest. I think it's time to put a former federal prosecutor on the same stage with Hillary Clinton, and I will prosecute her during those debates on that stage for the record that we're talking about here. The fact that she had a private email server in her basement using national security secrets running through it could have been hacked by the Russians, the Chinese, or two 18-year-olds on a toot wanting to have some fun. No one's answering that question from the Hillary Clinton camp. You know why? Because she knows she's wrong, and she cannot look in the mirror at herself, and she cannot tell the American people the truth.
Mr. Trump, Senator Rubio said it was, quote, very concerning to him that in a recent interview you didn't seem to know the details about some of the enemies the U.S. faces. Rubio said, if you don't know the answers to those questions, you will not be able to serve as commander-in-chief. Please respond to Senator Rubio.
Well, I heard Hugh Hewitt, a nice man, he apologized because he actually said that we had a misunderstanding, and he said today that Donald Trump is maybe the best interview there is anywhere that he's ever done. Now, unless he was just saying that on CNN to be nice, but he did say that.
Oh, you're the best interview in America.
And we had a legitimate misunderstanding in terms of his pronunciation of a word, but I would say just, well, I think it was. And he actually said that. Did you say that?
I said radio makes an interesting thing.
Okay, so I will say this, though. You was giving me name after name, Arab name, and there are few people anywhere that would have known those names. I think he was reading them off a sheet. And frankly, I will have, and I told him, I will have the finest team that anybody's put together, and we will solve a lot of problems. You know, right now, they know a lot, and look at what's happening. The world is blowing up around us. We will have great teams and great people.
I've done a lot of great interviews with all of you, but Governor Bush, I talked to you in February about the biggest elephant in a room full of elephants, which is your last name. And you told me that you would not be burdened either by your brother or your father's legacy in the Middle East. And then a week later, you rolled out your list of foreign policy advisors, and it was a lot of the band getting back together again. So on behalf of the military that is watching, okay, the active duty military that are at the end of the spear, what kind of a commander-in-chief is Jeb Bush going to be, and who are the advisors that are new to your team?
Well, first of all, Hugh, if you're looking at Republican advisors, you have to go to the last two administrations that happen to be 41 and 43. So just by definition, if you're, and many of the people here that are seeking advice from the foreign policy experts in the Republican side, they served in my dad's administration, my brother's administration. Of course that's the case. But I'm my own man. I'm going to create a strategy that's based on the simple fact that the United States needs to lead the world. The first thing that we need to do is to stop the craziness of the sequester, rebuild our military so that we don't deploy people over and over again without the necessary equipment to keep them safe, to send a signal to the world that we're serious. If we're going to lead the world, then we need to have the strongest military possible. We need to rebuild our counterintelligence and intelligence capabilities. We need to focus on the fact that the next president's going to start in 2017, not in 1990, 30 years ago, or when my brother started. The world is dramatically different. And I believe that we need to restore America's presence and leadership in the world. Name a country where our relationship is better today than it was the day that Barack Obama got elected president. Under Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, we have seen a weakness that now creates huge problems for the next president of the United States. So I'll have a team that will be following the doctrine that I set up, and it'll be peace through strength. We're sitting here in this library, which is a wonderful place to talk about this, because that's exactly what happened in the 1980s, and the world was a lot safer because of the leadership of Ronald Reagan and my brother.
I want to ask you a question, though. You've promised us great leaders, and I believe that. But Jeb Bush has laid out 20 different people that have experience around the world. There are 190 countries. You can't run the world by yourself. When are we going to get some names on your military and your foreign
Very
policy
soon,
advisor.
and I'm meeting with people that are terrific people, but I have to say something because it's about judgment. I am the only person on this dais, the only person that fought very, very hard against us, and I wasn't a sitting politician, going into Iraq. Because I said going into Iraq, that was in 2003, you can check it out, I'll give you 25 different stories. In fact, a delegation was sent to my office to see me because I was so vocal about it. I'm a very militaristic person, but you have to know when to use the military. I'm the only person up here that fought against going into Iraq.
Hugh,
now,
can I make a response to that?
Just excuse me 1 second,
Can
Rand,
I
if
make
you
a
don't mind,
response to
Rand.
that?
You know, you are on less, you do have your 1%. I would like, and I think it's very important, I think it's important because it's about judgment. It's about judgment. I didn't want to go into Iraq, and I fought it because what I said to you, was you're going to destabilize the Middle East, and that's what happened.
So he's referred to me in his
the first
remarks.
chance.
May I make a response?
Right after me,
Go ahead.
I'll yield the floor. What do you guys say in the Senate when you're talking and debating?
Absolutely. Go
Whatever.
ahead.
Here's the facts. When Donald Trump talks about judgment, what was his position on who would have been the best negotiator to deal with Iran? It wasn't a Republican. It was Hillary Clinton. That's what you believe. I mean, the lack of judgment and the lack of understanding about how the world works is really dangerous in this kind of time that we're saying. So is that the judgment that you bring to the table, that Hillary Clinton is a great negotiator, that she could bring about a better
Your
deal
brother
with Iran?
and your brother's administration gave us Barack Obama because it was such a disaster those last 3 months that Abraham Lincoln couldn't have been elected.
You know what? As it relates to my brother, there's one thing I know for sure. He kept us safe. I don't know if you remember, Donald. You remember the rubble? You remember the firefighter with his arms around it? He sent a clear signal that the United States would be strong and fight Islamic terrorism, and he did keep us safe.
Tomorrow is, Republicans know this, tomorrow is Constitution Day. We've been talking about the 10th Amendment. Let's talk about the Second Amendment. Governor Bush, one of the things the Supreme Court has gotten right is that it's an individual right. It's protected for individuals to hold it. Last week you said the next step in gun issues is to make sure they're not in the hands of the mentally ill. In this state, there's a controversial law that allows guns to be taken away from people without a hearing. Where does it go? And the problem of violence is endemic, but where does it go from what you said last week? How far into people's lives to take guns away from them?
Not very far. I think we need to do this state by state. There are places that get this right, and we need to make sure that we protect the privacy laws. This is a complicated place. But I do think the natural impulse on the left, Hillary Clinton, immediately after one of these horrific violent acts took place, immediately said we need to have federal gun laws. President Obama, almost reflexively, always says the same thing. And the net result is you're going to take away rights of law-abiding citizens, the 99.999% of the people that are law-abiding citizens. That's not the right approach to do it. In Florida, we have a background check. We have concealed weapon permit holders. In fact, there's 1,200,000 of them. We have a reduction in violent crime because we put people behind bars when they use a gun in the commission of a crime. That's the better approach. But we're living in a society today where despair kind of grows in isolation.
If a family member calls and says, my child, my brother, my sister is disturbed, ought the state be able to go and get their weapon without a hearing?
I think there needs to be a hearing, but the fact is we need to encourage that kind of involvement. That's exactly what we need to do.
Here, Hugh, and there's a broader issue here as well. First of all, the only people that follow the law are law-abiding people. Criminals, by definition, ignore the law. So you can pass all the gun laws in the world like the left wants. The criminals are going to ignore it because they are criminals. Here's the real issue. The real issue is not what are people using to commit violence, but why are they committing the violence? And here's the truth. Because you cannot separate the social, moral well-being of your people from their economic and other well-being. You cannot separate it. You can't have a strong country without strong people. You cannot have strong people without strong values, and you cannot have strong values without strong families and the institutions in this country that defend and support those families.
Senator.
Well, and today we have a left-wing government under this president that is undermining all of the institutions in society that support the family and teach those values.
Senator Cruz, I wanted to go to you. You're a constitutional litigator. Are you afraid of the next step theory of what happens to Second Amendment rights?
I am not, and you mentioned that the U.S. Supreme Court had rightly upheld the individual right to keep and bear arms. I was proud to lead 31 states before the U.S. Supreme Court defending the Second Amendment, and we won that landmark victory. And indeed, just a couple of years ago, when Harry Reid and Barack Obama came after the right to keep and bear arms of millions of Americans, I was proud to lead the fight in the United States Senate to protect our right to keep and bear arms. And for that reason, I was honored to be endorsed by Gun Owners of America as the strongest supporter of the Second Amendment on this stage today, and I will fight every day to defend the Bill of Rights.
We're live in Las Vegas for the final Republican presidential debate of 2015. Governor Pataki, you have called for following and finding those imams who are preaching violence in mosques. How exactly would you do that, and what mosques would you shut down? How extensive a surveillance program are you proposing?
You know, I think it's very important that we do everything in our power to prevent radicalization of Americans right here. And it is happening, not just overseas, but it's happening here from mosques, on social media, and through interaction in community meetings. New York Police Department had a very active group aggressively monitoring and using intelligence to, in certain Muslim communities, consistent with our Constitution, consistent with our civil rights, so they could have the intelligence as to where these sermons are being given and who is being radicalized. And they stopped and prevented dozens and dozens of attacks in New York. You know, I'm a great believer in the First Amendment and freedom of speech. I wish we had more of it on our college campuses. But you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. Calling on Americans to engage in violence against their fellow Americans in the name of jihad is crying fire in a crowded theater. It is not constitutionally protected speech. It should be shut down. And by the way, the two murderers who went to Garland, Texas, to massacre many Americans before the Texas police officer courageously killed them have been radicalized here. And getting to the metadata question, one of those terrorists, the day before the attacks, had sent 109 messages to a known terrorist overseas. We could not read those messages. We cannot read those today. We have got to do far better.
Governor Huckabee, as Governor Pataki noted earlier, we have a history of religious intoleration in this country. About the American Muslims who would be subject to this kind of surveillance, does it violate their First Amendment rights?
No, it does not violate their First Amendment rights to have someone go and listen to the sermons. You can go to any church in America. It's a public place. You can listen. And, you know, if you go to my church, you'll probably get a real blessing, and heck, it'll be a wonderful experience. You go to some people's church, you may go to sleep. I don't know what happens in every church, but the point is these are public places and folks are invited to come. So if it's a public place and people are invited to come, how does it violate anybody's First Amendment rights that somebody shows up because they might want to just listen in and see, is there something that is a little nefarious? And if there is, then you take the second step of getting a search warrant. You do whatever you have to do. That's all protected under the Constitution. So, Hugh, I hear people act like that there's something that is terrible about going and sitting in and listening to the sermons of a mosque. If Islam is as wonderful and peaceful as its adherents say, shouldn't they be begging us to all come in and listen to these peaceful sermons? Shouldn't they be begging us all to come and listen and bring the FBI so we'd all want to convert to Islam?
All right, so Senator Santorum, I want to stick then not on the First Amendment, but on the Second Amendment. There is a terror watch list. You can legally purchase a gun in the United States if you are on that watch list. Your old colleague, Peter King, the House, wants to change that law. Do you agree with him?
I don't. I don't think we should be able to deny someone's constitutional rights based on a list kept by the government that nobody knows how they get on it or how they get off of it. If you're going to make that list public, if you're going to put criteria out there as to how you're going to get on it, if you're going to deny someone's constitutional right, then I think there has to be more transparency. Let's just be honest. When someone applies for a gun, you do a background check. And if you're on the terrorist watch list, guess what very well may happen? You may get denied that. That's the discretion of the people, the ATF, in making that kind of decision. I want to leave that discretion. As long as this list is not well known, as long as it's not transparent, we have to leave that discretion. I want to make a comment about what Mike said and George said about Islam. The fact of the matter is, Islam is different. I know this is going to come as a shock to a lot of people, and I mean that sincerely. Islam is not just a religion. It is also a political governing structure. The fact of the matter is, Islam is a religion, but it is also Sharia law. It is also a civil government. It is also a form of government. And so the idea that that is protected under the First Amendment is wrong. And in fact, that political structure is what is the big problem. The imposition of Sharia law and adherence to fundamental Islam as it was practiced in the 7th century.
Governor,
and there has to be a line drawn.
I'll go back to you. Your response?
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with anything that the senator just said, because that's exactly right. But I just want to go back to the point that when people say, oh, we can't go into the mosque, we can't listen, that's utter nonsense. Of course we can. And if we can't, if there's something so secretive going on in there that somebody isn't allowed to go and hear it, maybe we do need for sure to send somebody in there and gather the intelligence. And that's all in the world I'm saying, and I think it stands to be true.
Can I say
Senator Graham, you're trying to get in?
Yeah. There are at least 3,500 American Muslims serving in the armed forces. Thank you for your service. You are not the enemy. Your religion is not the enemy. Let me make this real to you. I was at the second presidential election in Afghanistan. The guy guarding me was an American Muslim sergeant in the Army who grew up in Kabul, left when he graduated high school, joined the U.S. Army, went back to his high school where they were doing polling, people voting. He took me there. He cried like a baby. I cried like a baby. He is the solution to this problem, folks. He is not the problem. Leave the faith alone. Go after the radicals that kill us all.
Governor Huckabee, 10 minutes ago, you blasted President Obama for destabilizing Iraq. You hit former Secretary of State Clinton for supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. But you have said recently you would sanction countries that don't join the fight aggressively against ISIS. Having had an administration that has effectively undermined our friends and emboldened our foes, why would you start sanctioning those who are not yet on our side against ISIS?
Well, what we've done, and we've created an impossible atmosphere. This administration has put more pressure on Israel to stop building bedrooms in Judea and Samaria than they put on the Iranians to stop building a nuclear bomb. And I'm just simply pointing out the obvious, that we need to recognize who our friends are, who our enemies are.
But
I'm convinced, Hugh,
which countries are those, Governor, that you would sanction?
Well, first of all, it would be the Iranians. I would never have entered into this deal. I don't know why on God's earth that the senators gave it so that it was easier for Obama to have the agreement than it would be to make it a treaty.
That's an easy give. Are you going to sanction any of our allies who say, no, this isn't our fight, we're going to let you do this, or are you going to leave our allies alone? For example, Indonesia, Malaysia, other Muslim countries. Will you leave them alone?
I would make sure that there was some economic pressure put on them. Why not? Why should we fund every single battle against radical Islam? Why should we stand back and watch Israel get targeted, the United States get targeted, and we watch with people with their hands in their pocket and their hands in our pocket, because we're getting them a lot of money, and let's say your hands can be in your pocket, you can stand still, but your hands aren't going to be in our pockets anymore. We're not going to give you another dime unless you engage the battle with us. We're not sending our sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters to war to fight for your interest. You either get in with us or be on your own. But
Senator
we're not
Graham,
going to
I
take
just
the
named
battle for you.
two Islamic countries. Senator Graham, I just named two Islamic countries that are allies that he suggested we sanction. Is that the appropriate approach to this war?
No. What I would do is I would try to make friends throughout the world to destroy a common threat to the world. These people are religious Nazis. Most people in Islam don't buy what they're selling. I've told you 1,000 times that I would partner with the Arabs in Turkey, but the reason they don't partner with Obama is they just don't trust him. Do you think they would trust me? I know them all. I've been working for a decade to figure out how to win this war. To my good friend Ted Cruz, please ask him the following question. You say you would keep Assad in power. I will tell you that is the worst possible thing that could come out of an American leader's mouth. It would be disastrous. His favorite movie is apparently Princess Bride. Ted, getting in bed with Iran and Russia to save Assad is inconceivable.
Senator Santorum, let me ask you.
Princess Buttercup would not like this.
Senator Santorum, let me ask you, the opposite of getting into bed is shooting down the prince's plane. Senator Graham has said he would shoot down Russian planes bombing Syrian fighters on our side. Would you shoot down a Russian plane bombing American allied fighters in Tehran?
Well, I would establish a no-fly zone. And I think we just have to.
Well, if they fly into it, you shoot it down.
The first thing you have to do is establish a no-fly zone, and you don't do that by just sort of declaring it. You work through the process of making sure you work with people who hopefully have the same objective that you do. And if they don't, then you establish the no-fly zone, and you take the consequences of whatever who violates that.
The consequences would be war with Russia. Would you risk that?
I don't think it's a war with Russia any more than Turkey went to war with Russia when Turkey shot down a plane.
Senator Graham, you agree?
These are incidents, not something we're threatening the motherland. This is a tactical decision within an area that we have an obligation for the refugees, for providing stability to the rebels and an opportunity for the rebels to reconstitute, and making sure that we stop the flow of refugees into Europe and into the United States, to establish a no-fly zone. And Russia is either going to comply with it or not. And if they don't, I think it can be contained to that region.
Okay, we know you agree. Senator Graham, how about you, Governor Pataki? Would you shoot down Russian planes?
I would create the no-fly zone.
Yes.
I would
Yes.
I would create the no-fly zone. And let me tell you something very simply. Putin is a bully. And the most important and effective thing you can do to a bully is punch him in the face. Create the no-fly zone. If Russian planes violate that space, either us or the Turks should shoot them down to keep our word. And I guarantee you that Putin would back off. Bullies, when you stand up to them, back down. We have had, under Obama and under Hillary as Secretary of State, nothing but weakness in the face of Russia, whether it was in the Crimea, whether it was in Ukraine, or now in the Middle East. I would give the Ukrainians lethal weapons so they could defend themselves. I would create the no-fly zone. And if Russian planes flew into it in violation of what we had declared, yes.
Senator Graham. Senator Graham, in 2013, you were part of the leadership to push through immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform in the Senate of the United States. It died in the House. Many accused you of amnesty. It may have undermined your ability to get your message out on the war. Would you sign that bill again today? Would you sponsor that bill again today?
Well, the first thing I would do is make adjustments to reality. I want to look and see if this was a terrorist arranged marriage between the couple in California. The fact that they met online accidentally is almost zero. So no, I would have a timeout on Syrian refugees, because you'd be crazy if you didn't after Paris. But I've been to the refugee camps in Turkey and Jordan. Trust me, whether you're a Christian, and I'm a lousy Christian saved by grace. But this is important. We've got to stop this war. Do you realize that there are more Syrian refugees in Lebanon going to school than Lebanese children? Do you realize if this war goes for another year, the king of Jordan could fall? Let's have a no-fly zone.
But Senator, I'm misunderstanding.
I would make changes to that bill in light of what I know today.
Senator Santorum, is that sufficient for you?
Lindsey says this is a real war until it comes to immigration. And then all of a sudden, it's not such a real war. The reality is that we've seen since the events of 9/11, the president talks about how he's worried about discrimination and acts against Muslims. There's 4 times as many acts of violence against Jews than there are against Muslims, and I never hear the president talk about that. The reality is, under this president, since 9/11, this anti-Muslim United States of America has doubled the rate of Muslim immigration. Since 9/11. That's what we've done. So the idea that we have an immigration system that is working—
Thank you, Senator.
—is not. And
thank you, Senator.
I'm out of time.
Yep. Okay. Governor Huckabee, you have said that the children of immigrants who came here illegally should not be punished by their parents' actions. As president, would you continue President Obama's policy vis-a-vis the Dreamers?
No, because he did it unconstitutionally. 23 times he said he couldn't do it, and then one day he woke up and he found he had a pen in one hand and the phone in another, and wow, that Constitution didn't mean much anymore. Look, presidents can't just do what they want to do. That's the purpose of getting elected, and when working with other people who got elected, is that our system was designed to function with the power of persuasion. It's really what you elect a president to do.
Senator
You elect him
Santorum.
to lead. Let me finish you. You elect him to lead, which means that if you think it's a good idea to not punish the children for something their parents did, then you go to the members of Congress and you persuade them, and you persuade the American people. You don't just jump up and do it and shove it up the nostrils of Congress and the American people because you think you have a superior intellect and a superior will and a superior theology than everybody else. Our system is not a system of tyranny. We don't elect kings, we elect servants. If I'm elected president, I don't consider myself to be elected to be the king of the country, but the servant of the country to work with other people who are elected to get things done that need to be done.
Senator Santorum, your position on that policy, assuming that it was passed constitutionally, would you allow this? Would you support such an effort?
Here's the problem. I mean, I was with, in fact, one of my guests here today is the sheriff from Cochise County down on the border in Arizona. And he talked with me last night when I was with him about all of the children coming across. All of the children. Why? Because we've created a magnet. These children are not coming over and in great shape, not coming over and not in harm's way and going through difficult times. We're attracting people. He's also the sheriff that caught Syrians at the border. We have, through the policies supported by almost everybody in this field, a policy that says amnesty. The world hears it and knows that if they can come across this border, by and large, they're going to be able to stay. That has to change.
Thank you. Senator Cruz, you've said you disagree with Mr. Trump's policy. I don't want a cage match. You've tweeted you don't want a cage match, but Republican primary voters deserve to know, with the kind of specificity and responsiveness you delivered in your 9 Supreme Court arguments, how you disagree with Mr. Trump. Will you spell that out with us?
Well, listen, Hugh, everyone understands why Donald has suggested what he has. We're looking at a president who's engaged in this doublespeak, where he doesn't call radical Islamic terrorism by its name. Indeed, he gives a speech after the San Bernardino attack where his approach is to try to go after the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens rather than to keep us safe. And even worse, President Obama and Hillary Clinton are proposing bringing tens of thousands of Syrian refugees to this country when the head of the FBI has told Congress they cannot vet those refugees. I understand why Donald made that proposal. I introduced legislation in the Senate that I believe is more narrowly focused at the actual threat, which is radical Islamic terrorism. And what my legislation would do is suspend all refugees for 3 years from countries where ISIS or al-Qaeda control substantial territory.
So you're saying you disagree because he's too broad and you're having a narrower focus? Why do you disagree with him?
Well, you know, I'm reminded of what FDR's grandfather said. He said, all horse thieves are Democrats, but not all Democrats are horse thieves. In this instance, there are millions of peaceful Muslims across the world in countries like India, where there is not the problems we are seeing in nations that are controlled, have territory controlled by al-Qaeda or ISIS, and we should direct at the problem, focus on the problem, and defeat radical Islamic terrorism. It's not a war on a faith, it's a war on a political and theocratic ideology that seeks to murder us.
Carly Fiorina, this is the Christmas dinner debate. This will be the debate that Americans talk about at Christmas. And thus far, in the first 10 minutes, we haven't heard a lot about Ronald Reagan's city on a hill. We've heard a lot about keeping Americans out or keeping Americans safe and everyone else out. Is this what you want the party to stand for?
What I think we need to stand for are solutions. I offer myself as a leader to the people of this country because I think they're looking for solutions, not lawyers arguing over laws or entertainers throwing out sound bites that draw media attention. We need to solve the problem. To solve the problem, we need to do something here at home and something over there in their caliphate. We need to deny them territory. But here at home, we need to do 2 fundamental things. Number one, we need to recognize that technology has moved on. The Patriot Act was signed in 2001, roughly. The iPhone was invented in 2007. The iPad was invented in 2011. Snapchat and Twitter, all the rest of it, have been around just for several years. Technology has moved on and the terrorists have moved on with it. Let me tell you a story. Soon after 9/11, I got a phone call from the NSA. They needed help. I gave them help. I stopped a truckload of equipment. I had it turned around. It was escorted by the NSA into headquarters. We need the private sector's help because government is not innovating. Technology is running ahead by leaps and bounds. The private sector will help, just as I helped after 9/11, but they must be engaged and they must be asked. I will ask them. I know them.
Dr. Carson, you mentioned in your opening remarks that you're a pediatric neurologist surgeon. Neurosurgeon. And people admire and respect and are inspired by your life story, your kindness, your evangelical core support. We're talking about ruthless things tonight. Carpet bombing, toughness, war. And Dr. Carson,
we're going to have to open your head up and take out this tumor. They're not happy about it.
Things tonight. Carpet bombing, toughness, war. And people wonder, could you do that? Could you order airstrikes that would kill?
If you go ahead and finish the job rather than death by 1,000 pricks.
So you are okay with the deaths of thousands of innocent children and civilians? It's like...
You got it. You got it.
That is what war... Can you be as ruthless as Churchill was in prosecuting the war against the Nazis?
Ruthless is not necessarily the word I would use, but tough, resolute, understanding what the problems are, and understanding that the job of the President of the United States is to protect the people of this country and to do what is necessary in order to get it done.
Mr. Trump,
yes.
We are talking about the most important thing. That's why it's heated. And it's, you're okay with Mr. Assad staying in power, but you're also in favor of winning. If he stays in power, Iran is winning. Hezbollah is winning. Iran is winning in Yemen. They are winning everywhere. If they're winning, how can we be winning?
I think Assad is a bad guy, very bad guy, all right? Lots of people killed. I think we're backing people. We have no idea who they are. The rebels, we call them the rebels, the patriotic rebels. We have no idea. A lot of people think that they're ISIS. We have to do one thing at a time. We can't be fighting ISIS and fighting Assad. Assad is fighting ISIS. He's fighting ISIS. Russia's fighting now ISIS. And Iran is fighting ISIS. We have to do one thing at a time. We can't go, and I watched Lindsey Graham. He said, I've been here for 10 years fighting. Well, he'll be there with that thinking for another 50 years. He won't be able to solve the problem. We have to get rid of ISIS first. After we get rid of ISIS, we'll start thinking about it. But we can't be fighting Assad. And when you're fighting Assad, you're fighting Russia, you're fighting a lot of different groups. But we can't be fighting everybody at one time.
Governor Christie, is he right? Because if we step back, Iran goes nuclear. Is Donald Trump right?
Well, I think we have to focus, Hugh, on exactly what the priorities are. And to me, what I've always said is that the president has set up an awful situation through his deal with Iran. Because what his deal with Iran has done is empowered them and enriched them. And that's the way ISIS has been created and formed here. ISIS is created and formed because of the abuse that Assad and his Iranian sponsors have rained down on the Sunnis in Syria. And so when we empower Iran, this is why this president, and when Hillary Clinton says her theory against ISIS will be just about the same as the president, then get ready for more unrest and more murder and more violence in the Middle East. We need to focus our attention on Iran, because if you miss Iran, you're not going to get ISIS. The two are inextricably connected because one causes the other.
Senator Paul, let me ask you, you heard Governor Kasich say Assad must go. Do you agree?
No, I think it's a huge mistake. I think regime change in Syria, and this is what I've been saying this for several years now. In 2013, when we first went in, I said, you're going to give arms to the allies of al-Qaeda, to radical jihadists? That's crazy. But the other thing I said is the great irony is you'll be back fighting against your own weapons. Had Assad been bombed when he used chemical weapons 2 years ago, ISIS would be in charge of all of Syria now. We have to have a more realistic foreign policy and not a utopian one where we say, oh, we're going to spread freedom and democracy and everybody in the Middle East is going to love us.
Governor Kasich, a huge mistake.
In foreign policy, you have to know how to pick and choose. There's no way, if Saddam had not had weapons of mass destruction, I would have gone. Because I don't believe that U.S. should be involved directly in civil wars. I opposed the U.S. involvement in Lebanon. We ended up having to withdraw our Marines after our barracks were blown up. There's a difference between Iraq, where you have Sunni, Shia, and Kurds put together after First World War by the Western powers. It doesn't work. It needs to break up into three parts. And finally, in regard to Syria, understand that Assad is an ally of Iran who wants to extend that Shia radicalism all the way across the Middle East. He has to go. And for the Russians, frankly, it's time that we punch the Russians in the nose. They've gotten away with too much in this world, and we need to stand up against them, not just there, but also in Eastern Europe, where they threaten some of our most precious allies.
Governor Bush. Commander-in-Chief question. You've said that Mr. Trump is not qualified to be president because he's not qualified to deal with Vladimir Putin. Why are you better qualified to deal with Vladimir Putin than Mr. Trump?
Because first of all, I know what I don't know. I know what I don't know. I would seek out, as I have, the best advice that exists. I won't get my information from the shows. I don't know if that's Saturday morning or Sunday morning. I don't know which one. I will seek out the best advice, and I will create a strategy, and I will persuade the American people what the role of America should be. I've laid out a policy of rebuilding our military. All of the talk that we're saying here, most of which I agree on, frankly, requires a much stronger military. We now have a lack of readiness that is quite scary. We have planes that Harry Truman inaugurated, the B-52. We have the Navy has been gutted and decimated. The readiness of the Marines is way down. If we're serious about America's leadership in the world, then we need to make sure that we have the back of the armed forces. The Armed Forces Radio is here listening to this today. I hope they know that if I'm president, I'll be a commander-in-chief, not an agitator-in-chief or a divider-in-chief, that I will lead this country in a way that will create greater security and greater safety.
Mr. Trump.
I think it's very sad that CNN leads Jeb Bush, Governor Bush, down a road by starting off virtually all of the questions, Mr. Trump this, I think it's very sad. And frankly, I think it's very sad. And frankly, I watched the first debate, and the first long number of questions were, Mr. Trump said this, Mr. Trump said that, Mr. Trump. These poor guys, although I must tell you, Santorum, good guy. Governor Huckabee, good guy. They were very nice, and I respect them greatly. But I thought it was very unfair that virtually the entire early portion of the debate was Trump this, Trump that, in order to get ratings,
but Mr. Trump, it's not
in order
CNN.
to get ratings,
Mr. Trump, I was on
just think it's
CNN last
very
night watching.
Excuse me. I think it's very unprofessional.
But it wasn't CNN. It was me. I watched you last night for 16 minutes.
I think it's very
not
unprofessional.
CNN. It's not CNN. It's America's watching you.
Okay, fine.
It's America's watching.
So I was mentioned, so I can bring up something, I think, right? Look, the simple fact is, if you think this is tough and you're not being treated fairly,
this isn't tough and easy.
Imagine what it's going to be like dealing with Putin, or dealing with President Xi, or dealing with the Islamic terrorism that exists. This is a tough business to run for president.
I know you're a tough guy, Jeb.
And we need to have a leader that is
real tough.
You're never going to be president of the United States by insulting your way to the presidency.
Let's see. I'm at 42 and you're at 3. So far I'm doing better.
Doesn't matter.
So far I'm doing better. You know, you started off over here, Jeb. You're moving over further and further. Pretty soon you're going to be off the end.
This doesn't do a thing to solve the problem.
One at a time.
Hugh, go ahead. It sounds more and more what my daughter said that I said in the beginning. All the fighting and arguing is not advancing us.
It will not.
It is not the way we're going to strengthen our country. We will strengthen our country when we come together. And look, you've got Rand Paul, you got Ted Cruz, you got Marco, you got a lot of people on this stage that have studied these issues. You know what a leader does? A leader has a sound program, has a good policy, and then brings people together to solve problems. Guess what? Both in Congress and balancing the budget, and in Ohio fixing the economy. And by the way, we talk about defense. The first thing we better get going is strengthening our economy, because if we don't have a strong economy, we can't pay for all of this. And the world wants us to be able to function from strength, believe it or not. Get our economy going, get these people together in a room.
We can
Thank
fix
you.
this,
Thank
ladies
you.
and gentlemen. We don't have to fight
Governor.
all the time. It can be done, and we will be great
Thank
when
you,
we
Governor.
join together. Thank you, Hugh.
Dr. Carson, Commander-in-Chief question again. You've been the head of neurosurgery for a big hospital. You're on a lot of boards of a lot of companies. You've traveled the world. You're going traveling again next week. But does that prepare you to command troops from Djibouti to Japan, troops from Afghanistan to Iraq, to be in charge of the men and women watching on Armed Service Network tonight?
Well, you know, there's a false narrative that only the political class has the wisdom and the ability to be commander-in-chief. But if you go back and you study the design of our country, it was really designed for the citizen statesman. And we need to be talking about, where does your experience come from? You know, and I've had a lot of experience building things, organizing things, you know, a national scholarship program. One of the things that you'll notice if you look through my life is that I don't do a lot of talking, I do a lot of doing. And really it says more about a person than how much they talk. And then some people say you're weak because, you know, you're not loud and you're not boisterous and you're not rude. But the fact of the matter is, look and see what I've done. And that speaks volumes about strength.
Mr. Trump, Dr. Carson just referenced the single most important job of the president, the command, the control, and the care of our nuclear forces. And he mentioned the triad. The B-52s are older than I am. The missiles are old. The submarines are aging out. It's an executive order. It's a commander-in-chief decision. What's your priority among our nuclear triad?
Well, first of all, I think we need somebody absolutely that we can trust, who's totally responsible, who really knows what he or she is doing. That is so powerful and so important. And one of the things that I'm frankly most proud of is that in 2003, 2004, I was totally against going into Iraq because you're going to destabilize the Middle East. I called it very strongly, and it was very important. But we have to be extremely vigilant and extremely careful when it comes to nuclear. Nuclear changes the whole ballgame. Frankly, I would have said, get out of Syria, get out. If we didn't have the power of weaponry today, the power is so massive that we can't just leave areas that 50 years ago or 75 years ago, we wouldn't care. It was hand-to-hand combat. The biggest problem this world has today is not President Obama with global warming, which is inconceivable. This is what he's saying. The biggest problem we have today is nuclear proliferation, and having some maniac, having some madman go out and get a nuclear weapon. That's, in my opinion, that is the single biggest problem that our country faces.
Of the three legs of the triad, though, do you have a priority? Because I want to go to Senator Rubio after that.
I think to me, nuclear is just the power, the devastation is very important to me.
Senator Rubio, do you have a response?
I do. Well, first, let's explain to people home what the triad is. Maybe a lot of people haven't heard that terminology before. The triad is our ability of the United States to conduct nuclear attacks using airplanes, using missiles launched from silos or from the ground, and also from our nuclear subs, ability to attack. And it's important, all three of them are critical. It gives us the ability at deterrence. Now, some have become more critical than others, for example, the submarines. And that's the Ohio-class submarine that needs to be modernized. The air component also needs to be modernized. The B-52, as someone earlier pointed out, is an outdated model that was flown by the grandparents of people that are flying it now. And we need a serious modernization program as well on our silo-launched missiles. All three are critical for the defense.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. Mr. Trump, my listeners tell me again and again they're worried that Hillary Clinton will win the White House because you run as an independent. Are you ready to reassure Republicans tonight that you will run as a Republican and abide by the decision of the Republicans?
I really am. I'll be honest. I really am. I mean, people have been putting me to question. I really am.
I can apply. Dr. Carson.
Excuse me. Can I just finish?
Oh, please.
I've gained great respect for the Republican leadership. I've gained great respect for many, and I'm going to even say all. I mean, in different forms, for the people on the dais. No, in different forms. In different forms. But I have great respect for the people I've met through this process. I've never done this process before. I've never been a politician. I mean, for the last 6 months, I've been a politician. But I will tell you, I am totally committed to the Republican Party. I feel very honored to be the front runner. And I think I'll do very well if I'm chosen, if I'm so So fortunate to be chosen. I think I'll do very well. Polls have come out recently say I would beat Hillary. I will do everything in my power to beat Hillary Clinton. I can promise you.
Dr. Carson, Mr. Trump just committed to stay the distance regardless of the result. How about you?
Well, you know, the statement that I made last week that I would leave the party was contingent upon whether, in fact, the party acts like they have in the past with a lot of subterfuge and dishonesty, or like they're going to act now, because I spoke to Reince Priebus and he assured me that the Washington Post writer had it all wrong and that they're not going to be engaging in anything to thwart the will of the people. That's why I got into this race as a member of We the People, to try to bring some honesty and integrity back to the process.
We're live here at the University of Houston for the 10th Republican presidential debate.
I want to bring in Salem Radio Network host Hugh Hewitt. Hugh?
Thank you, Wolf. To me, it's the most important issue. I'll start with you, Senator Cruz. Do you trust Mr. Trump to nominate conservative justices?
Well, Hugh, I agree with you that Justice Scalia's passing underscores the enormous gravity of this election. Justice Scalia was someone I knew personally for 20 years, was privileged to be at his funeral this weekend, and with his passing, the court is now hanging in the balance. We are one liberal justice away from a 5-justice radical leftist majority that would undermine our religious liberty, that would undermine the right to life, and that would fundamentally erase the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms from the Constitution. Now, I think the voters of Texas, the voters across Super Tuesday, are assessing everyone standing on this stage. In the past, Republican presidents always promise to nominate strict constitutionalists. So I'm certain if you took a survey, everyone would say they would do that. But the reality is Democrats bat about 1,000. Just about everyone they put on the court votes exactly as they want. Republicans have batted worse than 500. More than half of the people we put on the court have been a disaster. I've spent my whole life fighting to defend the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and I can tell you, for voters that care about life or marriage or religious liberty or the Second Amendment, they're asking the question, who do you know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, who do you know will nominate principled constitutionalists to the court? I give you my word, every justice I nominate will vigorously defend the Bill of Rights for my children and for yours.
Mr. Trump, Senator Cruz mentioned the issue that keeps me up at night, which is religious liberty. Churches, Catholic and Christian colleges, Catholic adoption agencies, all sorts of religious institutions fear that Hobby Lobby, if it's repealed, it was a 5-4 decision, they're going to have to bend their knee and provide morning after pills. They fear that if Bob Jones is expanded, they will lose their tax exemption. Will you commit to voters tonight that religious liberty will be an absolute litmus test for anyone you appoint, not just to the Supreme Court, but to all courts?
Yes, I would, and I've been there, and I've been there very strongly. I do have to say something, and this is interesting, and it's not anybody's fault. It's not Ted's fault. Justice Roberts was strongly recommended and pushed by Ted. Justice Roberts gave us Obamacare. Might as well be called Roberts Care. 2 times of the Supreme Court, Justice Roberts approved something that he should have never raised his hand to approve, and we ended up with Obamacare. That is a rough thing, and I know Ted feels badly about it, and I think he probably still respects the judge, but that judge has been a disaster in terms of everything we stand for, because there is no way that he should have approved Obamacare. Now, with that being said, these are the things that happen, but Ted very, very strongly pushed Judge Roberts, and Justice Roberts gave us something that we don't want.
Ted Cruz, Senator, the Chief Justice got Hobby Lobby right, but what do you make of Mr. Cruz's criticism?
Well, listen, Donald knows that it was George W. Bush who appointed John Roberts. Yes, it's true, I supported the Republican nominee when he was made. But I would not have nominated John Roberts. I would have nominated my former boss, Mike Ludig, who was the strongest proven conservative on the Court of Appeals. And I'll tell you, Hugh, it's interesting now that Donald promises that he will appoint justices who will defend religious liberty. But this is a man who for 40 years has given money to Jimmy Carter, to Joe Biden, to Hillary Clinton, to Chuck Schumer, to Harry Reid. Nobody who supports far-left liberal Democrats who are fighting for judicial activists can possibly care about having principled constitutionalists on the court. And what Donald has told us is he will go to Washington and cut a deal. So that means on Supreme Court, he's going to look to cut a deal rather than fight for someone who won't cut a deal on the Constitution but will defend it faithfully.
Can I trust you on religious liberty?
Let me just say this. Look, I watched Ted, and I respected it, but it gets nowhere, stand on the Senate floor for a day or 2 days and talk and talk and talk. I watched the other senators laughing and smiling, and when Ted was totally exhausted, he left the Senate floor, and they went back to work, okay? We have to have somebody that's going to make deals. It's wonderful to stand up for 2 days and do that. Now, Ted's been very critical. I have a sister who's a brilliant, excuse me, she's a brilliant judge. He's been criticizing my sister for signing a certain bill. You know who else signed that bill? Justice Samuel Alito, a very conservative member of the Supreme Court, with my sister, signed that bill. So I think that maybe we should get a little bit of an apology from Ted. What do you think?
Senator.
Let me tell you right now, Donald, I will not apologize for a minute for defending the Constitution. I will not apologize for defending the Bill of Rights. And I find it amazing that your answer to Hugh and to the American people is on religious liberty. You can't have one of these crazy zealots that actually believes in it. You got to be willing to cut a deal. And, you know, there is a reason why when Harry Reid was asked of all the people on this stage, who does he want the most? Who does he like the most? Harry Reid said Donald Trump. Why? Because Donald has supported him in the past. And he knows he can cut a deal with him. You know what, Donald? I don't want a Supreme Court justice that you cut a deal with Harry Reid to undermine religious liberty, because that same justice will also erase the Second Amendment from the Bill of Rights.
When you say crazy zealot, are you talking about you, crazy zealot? Give me a break.
Senator Rubio, you've heard this exchange on religious liberty. Yeah. You have said that religious liberty will trump even the ability of people to stay away from same-sex marriages, not provide flowers, not provide baked goods, etc. Are you satisfied with this exchange on religious liberty?
Well, I think you ask a very important question, because the issue here about the next president of the United States has to fill this vacancy. Justice Scalia, in the history of the Republic, there has never been anyone better than him at standing for the principle that the Constitution is not a living and breathing document. It is supposed to be applied as originally meant. And the next president of the United States has to be someone that you can trust and believe in to appoint someone just as good as Scalia, plus there may be at least 2 other vacancies. So you ask Mr. Trump to respond and say that he would, and he says that he would, but the bottom line is, if you look at his record over the last 25 or 30 years, on issue after issue, he has not been on our side. Now, if he's changed, we're always looking for converts into the conservative movement. But the bottom line is that you don't have a record there to look at and say, I feel at peace that when Donald Trump is president of the United States, he's going to be firmly on our side on these issues. In fact, very recently, he was still defending Planned Parenthood. He says he's not going to take sides in the Palestinians versus Israel. These are concerning things. And so, yes, I have a doubt about whether Donald Trump, if he becomes president, will replace Justice Scalia with someone just like Justice Scalia.
Mr. Trump.
Well, let me just say, first of all, I had great respect for Justice Scalia. I thought he was terrific. And if you talk about evolving, Ronald Reagan was a somewhat liberal Democrat. Ronald Reagan evolved into a somewhat strong conservative. More importantly, he was a great president, a great president. As far as Planned Parenthood is concerned, I'm pro-life. I'm totally against abortion having to do with Planned Parenthood. But millions and millions of women, cervical cancer, breast cancer, are helped by Planned Parenthood. So you can say whatever you want, but they have millions of women going through Planned Parenthood that are helped greatly. And I wouldn't fund it. I would defund it because of the abortion factor, which they say is 3%. I don't know what percentage it is. They say it's 3%, but I would defund it because I'm pro-life. But millions of women are helped by Planned Parenthood.
Governor Kasich. Back to religious liberty. You've been a little bit less emphatic. You've said same-sex couple approaches a cupcake maker. Sell them a cupcake. Can we trust you as much on religious liberty as the rest of these people?
Well, you know, of course. I mean, and look, I was involved in just being a pioneer in a new church. Religious institutions should be able to practice the religion that they believe in. No question and no doubt about it. Now, in regard to same-sex marriage, I don't favor it. I've always favored traditional marriage. But look, the court has ruled, and I've moved on. And what I've said, Hugh, is that, look, you know, where does it end? If you're in the business of selling things, If you're not going to sell to somebody you don't agree with, okay, today I'm not going to sell to somebody who's gay, and tomorrow maybe I won't sell to somebody who's divorced. I mean, if you're in the business of commerce, conduct commerce. That's my view. And if you don't agree with their lifestyle, say a prayer for them when they leave and hope they change their behavior. But when it comes to the religious institutions, they are inviolate in my mind. And I would fight for those religious institutions. And look, I've appointed over 100 judges as governor. I even appointed a judge to the Ohio Supreme Court. And you know what they are? They're conservatives. Go check it out. They are conservatives. They don't make the law. They interpret the law. That's all they do. And they stick by the Constitution. So I will do that. But let's just not get so narrow here as to gotcha this or that.
Dr.
I think
Carson,
my position is clear.
Let me wrap it up with you. The position's clear. Are the positions you've heard clear about the First Amendment and the First Freedom?
Well, first of all, let me just add my praise to Justice Scalia. I first met him when we got an honorary degree together a long time ago. Tremendous wit and intellect. As far as religious freedom is concerned, one of the basic tenets of this nation. And I believe that the Constitution protects all of our rights, and it gives people who believe in same-sex marriage the same rights as everybody else. But what we have to remember is even though everybody has the same rights, nobody gets extra rights. So nobody gets to redefine things for everybody else and then have them have to conform to it. That's unfair. And this is the responsibility of Congress to come back and correct what the Supreme Court has done. That's why we have divided government. And we're going to have to encourage them to act in an appropriate way or we will lose our religious freedom. And as president, I would go through and I would look at what a person's life has been. What have they done in the past? What kind of judgments have they made? What kind of associations do they have? That will tell you a lot more than an interview will tell you. The fruit salad of their life.
Mr. Trump.
Are you going to
Are
you going to ask anybody else a question?
No, this goes to me.
Every single question comes to me?
Mr. Trump.
I know I'm good for the ratings, but it's a little bit ridiculous.
No, but Mr. Trump, a year ago, you told me on my radio show, the audio and the transcript are out there on YouTube, that you would release your tax returns. True. Are you going back on your
No, I'm not.
commitment?
First of all, very few people listen to your radio show. That's the good news. Let me just tell you, which happens to be true. Check out the ratings. Look, let me just tell you something. I want to release my tax returns, but I can't release it while I'm under an audit. We're under a routine audit. I've had it for years. I get audited. And obviously, if I'm being audited, I'm not going to release a return. As soon as the audit is done, I love it.
Okay, so Senator Rubio, Mitt Romney also called upon you to release your tax returns. Your campaign said last spring that you would release your returns that you had not previously released, and you'd say come out any day momentarily. When are we going to see your return?
Yes, tomorrow or Saturday, in fact, is our plan to release them, and there's nothing really that interesting in them, so I have no problem releasing them. And luckily, I'm not being audited this year, or last year for that matter. This is my time. I want to go back to this question you asked about the debt. This is an important issue. It's a huge issue, okay? In less than 5 years, 83% of our entire budget will be made up of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the interest on the debt. That means only 17% of our budget will be for things like the military or the Department of Education or environmental protection issues. You cannot balance our budget unless you deal with that 83%. Which is why I've been repeatedly talking about, since my time running for the Senate in Florida, where there are a lot of people like my mother that depend on Social Security and Medicare, on the need to save those programs by reforming the way they work for future generations. And I think the longer we take to do this, the closer we are going to get to a debt crisis. And Wolf, you did not get an answer to your question. This debt issue is the next president of the United States will not be able to serve 4 to 8 years without dealing with the national debt. It is not a question of if, it is a question of when we have a debt crisis. And we should not leave the stage here tonight without hearing a serious answer from every single one of us about how we're going to bring the national debt under control once and for all.
Thank you, Senator Rubio, but I'm being fair to all of the candidates. Senator Cruz, Tuesday is 5 days away. Why haven't voters seen your 2012, 2013, and 2014 returns?
So I've released 5 years of tax returns already. We will have 2 more years available tomorrow. And I would note that this question really goes, you know, Donald says he's being audited. Well, I would think that would underscore the need to release those returns. If he has said something that was false and that an audit is going to find was fraudulent, the voters need to know. And listen, people across this country, we recognize our country's in crisis. The most important question is, how do we win the general election in November 2016? And roughly 65% of Republicans think Donald is not the right candidate to go against Hillary Clinton. Now, part of the reason is in the last 10 polls on Real Clear Politics, he's lost to Hillary on 8 of them. In the last 10 polls on Real Clear Politics, I either tie or beat Hillary. And this is an example. You know, the mainstream media is laying off Donald now. They're going to pick apart his taxes. They're going to pick apart his business deals. And let's take, for example, one of Hillary's great vulnerabilities, the corruption at the Clinton Foundation. The fact that she had CEOs and foreign companies giving her money while she was Secretary of State. The next Republican nominee needs to be able to make that case against Hillary. And if Donald tried to do it, Hillary would turn to Donald and say, but gosh, Donald, you gave $100,000 to the Clinton Foundation. I even went to your wedding. He can't prosecute the case against Hillary, and we can't risk another 4 years of these failed Obama policies by nominating someone who loses to Hillary Clinton in November.
Mr. Trump, we are less than 24 hours away from a ceasefire in Syria that has been brokered between the U.S. and Russia. Do you support this ceasefire?
I really don't, because it's not working and the countries aren't agreeing to it and the rebels aren't agreeing and Syria is not agreeing to it. It's a meaningless ceasefire. I love the idea of a ceasefire. I love the idea with a total cessation. But it's not working, as you know very well. It's not working. If we can do all we want with Russia, but nobody else is adhering to it. So I certainly support it. I would certainly love it, but all parties have to be part of it.
Senator Cruz, your opinion on the ceasefire?
Well, look, we're certainly hopeful that the violence will cease, but there's reason to be highly skeptical. Russia has enhanced its position because of its weakness in the Middle East, weakness in Syria. And, you know, as we're headed to November, we need to nominate a Republican candidate that can lay out a clear difference with both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton on foreign policy. One of the real challenges with both Donald and Senator Rubio is that they have agreed over and over again with both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So, for example, in Libya, both of them agreed with the Obama-Clinton policy of toppling the government in Libya. That was a disaster. It gave the country over to radical Islamic terrorism, and it endangered America. Another example is John Kerry. John Kerry, Senator Rubio voted to confirm John Kerry as Secretary of State. I voted against him, and Donald Trump supported John Kerry against George W. Bush in 2004, gave him a check, and John Kerry has been the most anti-Israel Secretary of State this country has ever seen. His diplomacy has been a disaster, and if we nominate someone who agreed with John Kerry, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton on foreign policy, we're not in a strong position to win the general election.
A response, Mr. Trump, then Mr. Rubio.
Again, I think I gave them both checks, to be exactly honest. I think they both like me very much. But the fact is that...
You called for Bush to be impeached.
Well, I think Bush did a hell of a bad job as far as that's concerned. You know it, and so do I.
But you gave him a check and called for him to be impeached?
Be honest. No, this was before. The check came early. But let me just tell you, Syria, he's saying that I was in favor of Syria. He said I was in favor of Libya. I never discussed that subject. I was in favor of Libya. We would be so much better off if Gaddafi were in charge right now. If these politicians went to the beach and didn't do a thing, and we had Saddam Hussein, and if we had Gaddafi in charge, instead of having terrorism all over the place, would be, at least they killed terrorists, all right? And I'm not saying they were good because they were bad. They were really bad. But we don't know what we're getting. You look at Libya right now. ISIS, as we speak, is taking over their oil. As we speak, it's a total mess. We would have been better off if the politicians took a day off instead of going into war.
Senator Rubio?
Yeah, a couple points. Number one, on the Libya situation, we didn't topple Gaddafi. The Libyan people toppled Gaddafi. The only choice before America that this president had to make is, does it happen quickly or does it take a long time? And I argued if it takes a long time, you're going to have rebel forces emerge like these radical Islamists that take advantage of the vacuum. And that's what happened. That's where the term lead from behind came. And that's the foreign policy that apparently Senator Cruz appears to agree with. On John Kerry, Kerry, yeah. You know why? Because every day John Kerry wasn't appointed was another day Hillary Clinton was still in charge of the State Department. And she was absolutely horrible. I couldn't imagine that they were going to find somebody even worse than her. But this president never ceases to amaze. And the last point I would make on South Korea. So this is important. Because we're asking to be commander-in-chief. Donald is asking to be commander-in-chief, and he's saying these guys need to do more. South Korea contributes $800 million a year to that effort, and Japan contributes as well. And here's why our commitment to that regional security is so critical, Donald. Because if we walk away from them, both Japan and South Korea will become nuclear weapons powers. They can do that very quickly. And that's what they will do if the American defense agreements withers away, which is why we have to rebuild the military, but why we can't walk away from our Asia-Pacific defense status.
Mr. Trump.
I never said walk away. I wouldn't want to walk away. I want them to pay us much more money. We cannot afford to subsidize a lot. I'll negotiate a lot more money than you'll ever get. As far as John Kerry is concerned, there has been no tougher critic of this man. I think he negotiated one of the worst deals in the history of our country, the Iran deal, where they get their $150 billion and all of the other things that take place. It is a disaster for this country. And speaking of Israel, it's a disaster for Israel. I'm no fan of John Kerry.
Welcome to Miami, Florida. I'm Jake Tapper. In just 5 days, voters will go to the polls here in this state as well as in Ohio, Illinois, North Carolina, and Missouri. The race for the Republican nomination for president could change dramatically. And this is the last debate before that critical round of voting. I want to go to Hugh Hewitt, who has questions on this exact line of subject.
Mr. Trump, I want to follow up on the quote that Senator Cruz used. You said you would want to be, quote, sort of a neutral guy. He did mention Taylor Force. He was a West Point graduate. He was a war hero. He was a Vanderbilt graduate student. He was killed in a Palestinian terror attack near Tel Aviv. Many others were killed. And the Israeli government says the Palestinian Authority is inciting this. Do you still want to stay neutral when the Palestinian Authority is inciting these attacks?
First of all, there's nobody on this stage that's more pro-Israel than I am. Okay? There's nobody. I am pro-Israel. I was the Grand Marshal not so long ago of the Israeli Day Parade down Fifth Avenue. I've made massive contributions to Israel. I have tremendous love for Israel. I happen to have a son-in-law and a daughter that are Jewish, okay? And 2 grandchildren that are Jewish. But I will tell you, I think if we're going to ever negotiate a peace settlement, which every Israeli wants, and I've spoken to the toughest and the sharpest, they all want peace, I think it would be much more helpful. I'm a negotiator. If I go in, I'll say I'm pro-Israel, and I've told that to everybody and anybody that would listen. But I would like to at least have the other side think I'm somewhat neutral as to them so that we can maybe get a deal done. Maybe we can get a deal. I think it's probably the toughest negotiation of all time, but maybe we can get a deal done.
Senator
As far
Cruz,
as, and by the way, just so
Rubio.
you understand, as far as Iran, I would have never made that deal. I think it's maybe the worst deal I've ever seen. I think it's the worst deal I've ever seen negotiated. I will be so tough on them, and ultimately that deal will be broken unless they behave better than they've ever behaved in their lives, which is probably unlikely.
Senator
and that
Cruz
deal
and
will
Senator
be broken.
Rubio.
You know, we need a president who understands the national security interest of this country. The reason we are friends and allies with Israel is they are a liberal democratic country that share our values. They're our strongest ally in the region. We get billions in intelligence resources, billions in military resources. And the Palestinian Authority that Donald, along with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, say they want to treat neutrally the same as Israel. The Palestinian Authority is in a unity government with Hamas, a terrorist organization. They pay the families of these terrorists who murder people. And this is exactly the moral relativism Barack Obama has. And the answer is not scream all Muslims bad. Let me give you an example of a Muslim, for example, we ought to be standing with. President al-Sisi of Egypt, a president of a Muslim country who is targeting radical Islamic terrorists. He's hunting them down and stopping them. Our focus needs to be on keeping this country safe.
I want to go back to the Israeli government's assertion that the Palestinian Authority is inciting the convulsion of violence. Do you agree?
Well, that's undeniable. First of all, they've said they've encouraged people to do so. And
And you've seen the speeches of the Palestinian Authority president talking about how glorious this is that they're doing these sorts of things. But let me go back for a moment. The policy Donald has outlined, I don't know if he realizes, is an anti-Israeli policy. Maybe that's not your intent, but here's why it is an anti-Israeli policy. There is no peace deal possible with the Palestinians at this moment. There just isn't, because there's no one to negotiate with. The Palestinian Authority is not interested in a serious deal, and they are now in union with Hamas, an organization whose specific purpose is the destruction of the Jewish state. Every time that Israel has turned over territory of any kind, be it Gaza or now in Judea and Samaria, it is used as a launching pad to attack Israel. And that's what will happen again. These groups are not interested in a deal with Israel. What they are interested in is ultimately removing the Jewish state and occupying its entire territory. So maybe in 30 years the conditions will exist, but they do not exist now. And to have a president forcing the Israelis to the table is harmful to Israel and emboldens Israel's enemies.
Mr. Trump, a response, and we'll go to Governor Fish.
If I become president of the United States, one of the things that will be an absolute priority is, number one, protection of Israel, but also seeing if a deal can be made. The toughest deal, the toughest negotiation there probably is of any kind, no matter where you look, no matter how hard you look. But I would like to give it a shot. Very, very pro-Israel, nobody more pro-Israel, but I would love to give it a shot. And I have to tell you this, Hugh, I have friends, Israelis, non-Israelis, people from New York City that happen to be Jewish and love Israel. And some are very tough people. Every single one of them, they know it's tough, but every single one of them wants to see if we could ever have peace in Israel. And some believe it's possible. It may not be, in which case we'll find out. But it would be a priority if I become president to see if I can do it.
Do you agree with the Israeli government that the Palestinian Authority is inciting this violence?
Well, there's no question. They were saying that the Israelis intended to go to the Dome of the Rock. I mean, when you think about this, thank goodness we worked with the Israelis to give them the Iron Dome. And, where they could protect themselves against all the missiles that were flying in. Could you imagine living in Miami here and have people shooting missiles in? Secondly, there was just an article the other day, Hugh, that I know you're familiar with, where the Israelis are learning to train underground in combat because the Palestinians now, Hamas in particular, is digging these tunnels trying to get under Israel. They're coming at them from above. They're trying to come at them from under the ground. And I just have to tell you this. I don't believe there is any long-term permanent peace solution, and I think pursuing that's the wrong thing to do. I believe that every day that we can have stability in that region by supporting the Israelis and making sure they have the weapons and the security that they need with our 100% backing is the way to proceed in the Middle East in regard to Israel.
Senator Cruz, I want to stay in the region. Just this week, the head of U.S. Central Command, General Lloyd Austin, essentially said it's going to take a lot more troops on the ground to end the ISIS threat in Syria and Iraq. In the beginning of this campaign, you have said you will follow the judgment of military commanders in the Pentagon. So here's a commander saying we need a lot more troops on the ground. Will you follow that advice and inject Americans again into what is, in essence, a metastasizing Sunni-Shia civil war?
We need to do whatever is necessary to utterly defeat ISIS. And that needs to be driven not by politicians, but by military expertise and judgment. Right now, we're not using a fraction of the tools that we have. We're not using our overwhelming air power. We're not arming the Kurds. Those need to be the first steps, and then we need to put whatever ground power is needed to carry it out. But, a question that actually Jake asked, and I'm glad to come back to it now, is rules of engagement. We have right now our troops engaged in combat, but President Obama has rules of engagement that are so strict that their arms are tied behind their back. They're not able to fight. They're not able to defend themselves. They're not able to kill the enemy. And I got to tell you, Hugh, I think that is wrong. It is immoral. And I give my word to every soldier, sailor, and airman and Marine, and to every wife and husband, every son and daughter, every mother and father, that will end in January 2017.
Governor Kasich. If it takes 20 or 30,000, if the Pentagon says that's what needs to be done, will you follow their advice?
Well, I've said all along and laid out my foreign policy. I want to remind everybody that 55% of the foreign policy experts in this country said I was the best to be commander-in-chief. I spent 18 years on the Defense Committee, Armed Services, and then I was in the Pentagon with Donald Rumsfeld after 9/11, in and out for a couple years. We absolutely have to win this with a coalition. The Arabs have to be with us. The Europeans have to understand that this threat is closer to them than even is as close as it is to us. And in addition to that, you have to be in the air and you have to be on the ground. And you bring all the force you need. It's got to be shock and awe in the military speak. Then once it gets done, and we will wipe them out, once it gets done, it settles down, we come home and let the regional powers redraw the map if that's what it takes.
Mr. Trump, more troops?
We really have no choice. We have to knock out ISIS. We have to knock the hell out of them. We have to get rid of it, and then we have to come back here and rebuild our country, which is falling apart.
How many are we
have no
speaking
choice.
about?
I would listen to the generals, but I'm hearing numbers of 20 to 30,000. We have to knock them out fast. Look, we're not allowed to fight. We can't fight. We're not knocking out the oil because they don't want to create environmental pollution up in the air. I mean, these are things that nobody even believes. They think we're kidding. They didn't want to knock out the oil because of what it's going to do to the carbon footprint. We don't fight like we used to fight. We used to fight to win. Now we fight for no reason whatsoever. We don't even know what we're doing. So the answer is we have to knock them out. We have to knock them out fast, and we have to get back home, and we have to rebuild our country, which is falling apart.
Let's go back to Salem Radio's Hugh Hewitt.
Thank you, Jake. Governor Kasich, the math and the map say that you can only become the nominee if, in fact, there is a contested convention. If we arrive on the shores of Lake Erie, Donald Trump has the most delegates, why shouldn't the person with the most delegates, even if it's not a majority of delegates, be the nominee?
Well, first of all, let's not, the math doesn't tell the whole story in politics. The great thing about politics, the reason why we watch it is because what's true today is not necessarily true tomorrow. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. Secondly, look, when you went to school up there in Salem, Ohio, okay, if you got an 86, you got a B. Because everybody else had an 84 didn't mean you got an A. So you just have to win enough delegates to be the nominee. And frankly, I don't know if we're going to get at a convention like that, but if we do, I was at one in 1976 as a wee lad and supported Ronald Reagan and actually worked directly with him. He tried valiantly. He lost. Gerald Ford won. The party was united. Gerald Ford served the country great by pardoning Richard Nixon. He lost the election probably because of that, but he put America first, and we were healed as a party. So, look, you have to earn the delegates in order to be picked, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We don't know what's going to happen because we still have about half the delegates to be selected. And that's what's going to be a very interesting thing to see how it all turns out as we move forward over the next couple weeks.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Trump, if you arrive in Cleveland with a plurality, and the most, but not a majority, is it legitimate for someone else to emerge from that convention, the nominee, and if so, would you support that person?
I think that what should happen, getting back maybe a little bit to your first question, I think that whoever, first of all, I think I'm going to have the delegates, okay? I think. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. But if somebody doesn't have the delegates, and I guess there's two of us up here that can, and there are two of us that cannot at this moment. But if some, no, that's, by the way, that is not meant to be a criticism. That's just a mathematical fact, okay? If two of us get up there, I would say this, if Marco, if the governor, if Ted had more votes than me in the form of delegates, I think whoever gets to that top position, as opposed to solving that artificial number that was set by somebody, which is a very random number, I think that whoever gets the most delegates should win. That's what I think.
Senator Cruz, if you overtake Donald Trump at the convention, what will you do to take his very passionate supporters and keep them from bolting the convention and sabotaging the fall election?
Well, look, there's some folks in Washington. Donald, you are welcome to be president of the Smithsonian. There's some in Washington who are having fevered dreams of a brokered convention. They're unhappy with how the people are voting, and they want to parachute in their favored Washington candidate to be the nominee. I think that would be an absolute disaster, and we need to respect the will of the voters. It's one of the reasons why in the course of this election, listen, everyone up here has worked very, very hard, but Donald is right. There are only two of us that have a path to winning the nomination, Donald and myself. At this point, I have roughly 360 delegates. He has about 100 more than I have. We have at this point beaten Donald in 8 separate states all over the country, geographically, from Maine to Alaska, from Kansas to Texas, all over this country. We have beaten him. And so, for the people at home, if you're one of the 65, 70% of Republicans who recognizes that if we nominate Donald Trump, Hillary wins. That's why the media wants him to be the nominee so much. If you recognize that, then I want to invite you, if you've supported other candidates, come and join us. We are seeing candidates coming together and uniting. It's why Carly Fiorina endorsed me yesterday. It's why Mike Lee endorsed me today. I ask everyone to come together. Let's stand together and let's beat Hillary Clinton in November.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Then to Senator Rubio.
You know, I listen and I watch Ted on television, and when he speaks, and he's always saying, I'm the only one that beat Donald in 6 contests, and I beat him. But I beat him in 13 contests. He never mentions that. And let me just tell you another little fact, little minor fact. I have about 1,600,000 votes during this primary season, more votes than Ted. The other thing is, I beat Hillary, and I will give you the list. I beat Hillary in many of the polls that have been taken, and each week I get better and better, and believe me, I haven't even started on her yet.
Senator Rubio.
Let me tell you what this election is about for me. And I get all the delegate math and all that debate. Let me tell you what it's about for me. On Tuesday night, I didn't do as well, obviously, as I wanted to, and I was a little bit disappointed when I got home. And my wife told me a story that night, which is the reason why I can get up the next day and keep fighting. There's a gentleman here in South Florida who just got out of surgery, and his doctors told him he needs to be home resting. But every afternoon, he takes his little aluminum chair and he sits outside of an early polling center and holds a sign that says Marco Rubio. Because for him, I symbolize all the sacrifices that his generation made so their children could have a better life than themselves. That gentleman has not given up on me, and I am not going to give up on him. I am going to work tirelessly every single day because this election is too important. What's at stake is the future of this country. And I believe that at the end of this process, this nation will make the right choice. Because I've always believed that God has blessed America, that God's hand is upon this country, and that its greatest days are yet to come.
And that concludes this 12th Republican presidential debate. We want to thank the candidates, the Republican National Committee, the University of Miami, and of course, each of you for watching. I'm Jake Tapper. Our coverage